Okay, friends, now we move ahead, and we are on program 71 of the externalization of the hierarchy. And today, what is today? Today is the 8th of June. Just a little segue here. We're talking about the alignment being correct and adjusted for the first time in planetary history. And this is about the alignment between Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity. It's not yet complete, but let's just say it is correct and it is adjusted. And even if this be only temporarily so, because there may be other times when other adjustments are needed, so something has been initiated, the effects of which will never be lost. It is a cycle also in which the planetary logos, having successfully taken initiation and thus affected his planetary life, so he's taken the first cosmic initiation, I believe at the time of individualization, and some subsidiary initiations. He's passing through a fourth subsidiary on our chain and within our scheme. So he's affected his entire planetary life, has also established certain extra planetary relationships which are necessarily incomprehensible to you and of no moment whatsoever to the individual human being, maybe to the group of humanity, but which will eventually create a situation in which our planet will become a sacred planet. And that eventuality may lie some millions of years ahead, although we are told that our planet is already inwardly sacred, which is interesting. This process, as it unfolds and develops, will have a potent subjective and deeply spiritual effect upon every kingdom in nature and in the realm also of supernature. So this takes us into the next article. And we're getting more and more practical as we go along. So this is the steps in the externalization process, and I'm just trying to bring this, my chronometer, you know, yeah. All right. For some time, ever since 1425, a date to which I referred earlier, the hierarchy has been aware that the time would come when this projected move would take place. So, you know, what move are we talking about here? The externalization. Okay. So let's, and you know, this is a date which is significant in terms of the European Renaissance, especially the Italian Renaissance, but eventually all of Europe was affected. So maybe one of the direct results of this conclave and the decisions made there in 1425 would be this reawakening of humanity out of stultifying, at least at that time, stultifying medieval values. I know there are some conservatives who think of the Renaissance as, quote, a decadent May, April, May, June, a decadent May. And they don't like the release of humanism, which seemed to come with it. They think it was not sufficiently God-centered, but certainly did a lot to promote the idea of God immanent in man. And this immanence gives us relief from the strictly transcendental notion of our planetary God. This means that every part of his creation is divine, at least with its essence at the very heart of the demonstration, of the manifestation. So that was about 800 years ago. Will be 600. Yeah, let me get my calculations straight. We're heading for 2025, so about 600 years ago. Preparations have gone steadily forward. A point to be remembered is that the impulsed intention emanating in the first place from Shambhala, since now a gradually correcting alignment has been possible. Impulse from Shambhala came as a major disturbance to the rhythm of many tens of thousands of years, and it has been a basic conditioning factor. So things were relatively stable for a long time, and then in came this impulse toward renewal. Let's see, what do we have here? Make this a little bit bigger. Okay. But hierarchy does intervene, and when Shambhala intervenes, it's even a more noticeable result, and maybe more temporarily upsetting, but thank goodness, it did happen. Emanating in the first place, and that means in the second place from hierarchy, almost certainly. The masters, however, let me get down here. The masters, however, who will make the move outwards into contact with the world, the world as we know it, are not the ones who registered the initial impulse from Shambhala, nor are the three heads of the great departments the same. Well, not entirely the same. The Christ was still head of the department, but probably certainly the Mahachohan has changed, and maybe the Manu too. We'll have to see about the reign of the Manu then and the Manu now. The earlier masters initiated the needed steps of preparation, and the work has gone steadily forward, but not the same ones entirely. The change to Master R as the Mahachohan after a very long reign by the Mahachohan who preceded him that change occurred in 1925, would be my estimation, when so much of the hierarchy moved the ashrams to the Buddhic plane. Not all, and some are to be found on the Atmic plane. You might well ask, what were these steps, and along what lines has the preparation gone? Though the masters of the wisdom have all passed through the human experience and are simply men who have achieved a relative measure of perfection, note that, relative. Human beings are so much in search of the perfected ideal man that they want to stop the progress of that ideal man. As if the Christ, for instance, has evolved as much as he ever will, and that's it. He is the Son of God, and nothing further can be said. Well, that attitude stultifies the idea of constant evolution in our solar system and cosmos and even the universe. They are simply men, these masters, who have passed through a relative measure of perfection. There are aspects of physical contact which they have completely transcended and utterly negated. I think that's an important idea because they are not subject to the lure of the substance of the previous solar system. That is, let us call it the dense physical body of our planetary logos, that kind of substance. There is nothing in the three worlds with which they have any affinity, except the affinity of life. That much they share, and the impulse of love for all beings. Recovery of certain facilities of activity has been deemed necessary. Well, otherwise how could they function down here with us when they externalize? For instance, the five senses, where a master is concerned, exist and are used at need, but the contact established and maintained with their disciples and senior aspirants in the world, through whom they primarily work, is largely telepathic. Hearing and sight, as you understand their uses, are not involved. So this has to do with the manner in which the masters contact, well, maybe some of us as senior aspirants, or how did he put it here? Their disciples and senior aspirants, yes, that is how he put it. Every true aspirant, we remember, has taken the first initiation. So if they are senior aspirants, probably they have taken the initiations of the threshold, but are not yet initiates. A true disciple, well, maybe has taken accepted discipleship, or is recognized as an accepted disciple. So we have to understand it's quite a downward transformation for these great souls to reactivate that which they have left behind. And they are certainly condensing or cramping or in some way constraining their abilities to make an appearance here with us, even as the great sacrifice, Sanat Kumara, standing at his post until the last weary pilgrim has found his way home. He is certainly compressing his cosmic abilities. But such is the nature of the deliberately pursued sacrifice of these great beings, and it will be our method as well. The science of impression, with its greatly increased effectiveness over individual contact, through the senses has entirely superseded the more strictly human method. So the usual ways of contact are different from what is customary when, say, one person meets another. As Master DK tried to tell at the beginning of his work with his disciples, he does work on the level of the mind and the soul. And he did say that he would not be directing his attention to their personal factors, their personality. And yet, of course, having compassion and seeing the need, sometimes the dire need, he did exactly that, even giving physical advice about diet and exercise and things of that nature. Going on, except in the case of masters working on the physical plane and in a physical body, which is certainly, possible, the outer physical senses are in abeyance. For the majority of masters who still use these senses, the use is strictly limited. Their work is almost entirely subjective, and the mode of telepathic interplay and of impression is practically all the means which they employ to reach their working agents. Therefore, the recovery of past usages of a more physical nature has been one of the preparatory moves. You've got to, we know about that, and when you've neglected, or at least turn your attention away from certain abilities, it may take time to again re-grasp them and sharpen their use. Even as when we've memorized something and don't work with it, it takes time to regain the memory, though it is naturally faster, that regaining of memory, than if you approach an entirely new subject to conquer with memory. Okay. So this is the question of what steps have been taken and what line has preparation taken. And he goes on here to say, another has been the achievement of a wide culture and understanding of the current civilization, which will be coming into activity and control, note the word control as well as activity, when the intended project is carried out. What a huge project it is. You have been told, and told correctly, that the masters do not trouble themselves to attain proficiency in all educational subjects. In modern history, for instance, or the newest scientific procedures, or the use of foreign languages, in all their ashrams, there are those who can supply them with any specified knowledge which they may need at a given time or for a specific purpose. And that in itself is interesting. So of the three cosmic laws, we can say that, whoops, that's not it, is it? That's a link. Yeah, let me get my wonderful little brackets here. That their way of working functions under the law of economy. And, it's the same way that when they have a disciple who has, let us say, taken the second initiation and opened the sixth petal of the egoic lotus, they can use the body, the vehicle of that disciple, rather than having to be born again, let's say, or having to generate a Maya Virupa. It's more economical to use what is adequately prepared. So naturally, we who seek to be their disciples want to put ourselves in a position where, whether for this or that, we can be used to manifest the plan. This will still remain true of those who have attained the rank of master, but it is not true of the senior initiates, many of whom probably, Chohans? Many remain true of those who have attained the rank of master, but it is not true of all of the senior initiates, many of whom, as they passed into higher grades and under instruction from a master, have retained their worldly knowledge besides specializing in certain strictly mundane approaches. No, it's not about Chohans, it's about those who are instructed by the masters, senior initiates, maybe of the fourth degree, let us say. He has different words for different ranks of initiate. The initiate is the one who has taken the third degree, the senior initiate, apparently the fourth, instructed by a master, even as a master will be instructed by a Chohan. So, okay, some senior initiates retain what they know and are knowledgeable in the areas they must exercise and must still pay attention to the developments within the civilization of which they are a part, or the culture of which they are a part. For instance, there are adepts who are authorities upon modern financial matters. And these initiates of the fourth degree, okay, he calls them adepts here. Now, arhat is more of a qualitative word indicating nobility and valor, that kind of thing. Usually the word arhat applies to the fourth degree and adept to the fifth degree, but here the word adept is being applied to the fourth degree. For instance, there are adepts who are authorities upon modern financial matters, and these initiates of the fourth degree are competently preparing to institute later those newer techniques and modes of financial interplay which will supersede the present disastrous methods. So, along with the masters will come their senior initiates, and they will be part of the externalizing force as well. They will inaugurate a system of barter and exchange of which money is the travestied symbol. Now, this is really interesting, because we're told that money may have to be withdrawn as a medium of exchange. Here it seems that it is desirable that it be withdrawn. They will inaugurate a system of barter and exchange of which modern money is the travestied symbol. This newer method of financial relationship will be comprehensively human, I imagine, for the benefit of all, and it will supersede big business and private enterprise. It will at the same time, however, retain those phases of modern enterprise which will draw out the initiative and the resourcefulness of the individual. I suppose in the attempt to create something exchangeable, which is really wanted and useful by the person with whom the exchange is occurring. Okay. So, this is interesting about the qualifications of these externalizing senior initiates and how the masters can use them. Those that have been under their impression, under the impression of the ashram of which the master is the center. Other initiates have specialized in the various languages, and two of them are authorities in basic English. This is the form of the English language which will eventually take the place of other languages in all form of international and business intercourse, without in any way obliterating the individual national languages in daily use. So we have a prediction, read the utility of basic English. Okay. Yeah, there it is. I'll put the Mercury color in there. There's no real rhyme or reason to the colors I'm using here, sometimes for emphasis, and sometimes they have an association with what is being said. So, two things must be realized as the interested student considers this event of externalization. Number one, the senior methods, the senior members of the hierarchy will not be the first ones who will make the needed approach. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? First come, the aspirants, or let's say the disciples and initiates. It makes sense. And then come the masters of the lesser ashrams, subsidiary ashrams, and only then, if a senior member such as Chohan is going to externalize, then after all is prepared. And so much has to be prepared, therefore, before the Christ, as the most senior in hierarchy, comes into outer noticeability. So they're not the first, the senior members. Under their direction and their close supervision, this approach will be made in the early stages by initiates of and under the degree of the third initiation, and also by those disciples who will be chosen and designated to implement their efforts and so work under their direction. Now, remember, we talked about this a bit, how the WASAC will not continue as it in its present form, but in every country will be a representative, a disciplic or initiate representative who will receive a direct impression from the Buddha, and maybe also the Good Friday kind of the Good Friday significance. Another first ray festival will also have its chosen representative in every country, and if not that, then the Festival of the Christ, which is not going to be an obsolete festival, however, will also have its chosen representative in each country. The details of how that will work have not been given, but certainly it is an interesting method of continuation. Once, let's say, the Wesak is no longer used in the customary manner, maybe the Good Friday festival, or maybe that will fade out of use, or maybe some different keynote will be struck in relation to it. In any case, the different countries will have their representatives that receive direct impression from the great soul that has been or is associated with those festivals, the Buddha, the Christ. So, okay, they are preceded, the senior members of hierarchy are preceded, the Chohans, by those disciples who will be chosen and designated to implement their efforts, and so will work under their direction. So maybe it's no small thing then to be a capable initiate of the threshold under the third degree, because they can be certainly used beneficially. It is only in the later stages, and when the time has come for the return into recognized physical expression of the Christ. In other words, he may be in physical expression for those who know how to find him when he is occupying his Maya Virupa. But later it will be recognized physical expression, and as the saying goes, every eye shall see him. It is only in the later stages, and when the time has come for the return into recognized physical expression of the Christ, leading to the definite restoration of the mysteries, and we don't know how long that will take, that certain of the senior members of the hierarchy will appear and take outer and recognizable physical control of world affairs. My goodness. The time for this will be dependent necessarily upon the success of the steps taken by the members of the hierarchy who are not so advanced. And, looking at the analogy, a big analogy, of when will our solar logos take the fifth initiation? Well, it could be in this solar system, but it depends very much upon progress here on Earth and maybe on other planets, because the Earth scheme represents the base of the spine center, which is involved in, most involved in the fifth initiation. So, all right, the later stages. So, are we talking about Master M, Master KH, Master Hilarion, Master Serapis? I mean, we seem to be talking about the Chohans, who are higher than the Masters. The Masters can externalize more rapidly. Always an initiate of lesser degree precedes and prepares for the coming out of his superior. All right, so that's one point to bear in mind. There are so many points to bear in mind, This is regarding the externalization, and 2 points that we have to have in mind. We certainly need a retentive memory to have these points in mind, but that's what study is for, to ponder on this and to lodge these important points in the memory so that they can be compared and cross-referenced and so forth. Okay, another point. Members of the hierarchy, whether working in the early stages or later, when the true externalization will takes place, will work as members of the human family and not as proclaimed members of the kingdom of God or souls, known as the hierarchy. Well, no need necessarily to call undue attention to oneself, perhaps as a successful human being. What one represents can be more easily followed or instituted. And humanity it's prone to exaggeration, and it's prone to euphoria of devotion, which is off-putting to thinking people. So these members who precede the higher initiates, they have to prove themselves, and they will prove themselves, and they will be looked to for that wise counsel in all the 5 planetary centers and in many cities, I imagine, of significance. So they will not proclaim themselves, which is kind of an analogy of the true revelator not making any claims about the value of his revelation. There's so many people that are making claims to be this or to be that, whereas the true initiate does not do that. And until, he will be recognized, of course, by his works, and those around him or her, of course, will recognize the status. Okay, so work as members of the human family, and when the true externalization takes place, I guess always there has to be the preparatory period. We began this by saying from 1425, the work has gone forward steadily, and it has been work of preparation. They will appear in office of some kind or another. They will be the current politicians, businessmen, financiers, religious teachers or churchmen. They will be scientists and philosophers, college professors and educators. They will be the mayors of cities and the custodians of all public ethical movements. The spiritual forcefulness of their lives, their clear, pure wisdom, the sanity and the modern acceptableness of their proposed measures in any department in which they choose to function will be so convincing that little impediment will be set in the way of their undertakings. So, DK has said that the true initiate is known by a quality known as sanctified normality. Nothing bizarre, nothing fanatical, nothing beyond the pale and strange and weird, not that, but known by sanctified normality, which is a deeply spiritual normality and is correct for what a human being really is. So far, we've been living very much according to our animal self, and until Mars is defeated, as it will be by the time the 3rd initiation is reached and challenged, certainly at the 2nd initiation, the animal nature will still present a big impediment. But if we are aware of its tendencies and the need to supersede it through the spiritual will of Vulcan, then we'll be in much better condition to be useful in this externalization process. At the present stage of preparation, he says, the task of the disciple who is charged with laying the foundation for the New Age methods and with the labor of getting ready for the first group of ashram members is hard indeed. I'm remembering how he was speaking to his first-ray disciple in South America and talking about the rocky soil in which he had to work and plant the seeds of the future. In that political group, only 3 of the proposed 9 members were summoned together because the project was not abandoned, but suspended until a future moment. And that future moment, the Seed Group project, ending, I suppose, in 2200, the year 2200 roughly, or maybe 2225, who knows. That project will be recommenced after the Christ reappears. So the new disciple, he has a tough time. Why is that? Because he stands for so much, says the Tibetan, that is deemed visionary and impossible. I remember a deep friend of mine saying, you'll never change human nature. You'll never change human nature. Well, our entire teaching is based upon evolving human nature. It's not necessarily a change, but it is an apparent change when the inner possibilities are released, the changing of human nature, apparently, but not really. So he stands for so much that is visionary and impossible. The difficulties, it's deemed visionary and impossible. The difficulties which confront him seem impossible. He teaches truths whose first effect is necessarily destructive. Well, it disrupts the held point of view of lesser minds and belief systems. It's destructive because he endeavors to rid humanity of old forms of religious, economic, and political doctrine. His impersonality, which recognizes faults as well as virtues, engages many, enrages many, and often those from whom he had expected understanding and true impartiality. His failure to be impressed or attentive to old rites and ceremonies, to ancient and obsolete but precious ideas. You hold on to what gives you comfort. And his constant warfare on conditioning glamours and illusions meets in the early stages with little encouragement. Well, this is why it is difficult, and at least in the beginning stages, and we all have to pass through that. There's no way to become a senior aspirant or an initiate or a senior initiate or a master or a truly super senior initiate, such as a Chohan would be, without passing through this type of difficulty, this type of obstacle. He works frequently alone and usually with little recognition and lacks time for his own personal hierarchical contacts. He is not necessarily connected with any so-called esoteric groups, and if he is, his task is that much harder. Only, that's interesting, isn't it? You might think it would be facilitated, maybe in some ways it is. Only advanced disciples with a full and conscious, constant contact with their particular ashram are able to work in this way. And when we talk about an advanced disciple, we may well be talking about an initiate, because we're talking about a constant contact with the ashram. So these are the, what can we call them? The hardships of the early phases of bringing forward the point of view of the ageless wisdom. And I'm sure many of us have experienced those dismayed looks that indicate that the person to whom you are speaking, who may be one of your relatives or someone from whom you hoped for cooperation, thinks that really you're quite crazy, or at the very least deluded, you know? The idea of standing for these things is important, but at the same time you follow the Christ and do not attempt the impossible in this regard, that you do not cast your pearls before swine. You determine to whom you may speak of what sort of things, and you obey the principles of occult silence. You know, as it tells us in chapter 10, you're not talking about the affairs of the ashram with those who don't even know what an ashram is, and will throw your deeper truths right back at you, and will, in fact, endanger the propagation of such truths. It happens all the time, even with the Bailey material. People who look at it, immediately some of their old conditioning comes up, and they think, the devil, Satan's at work, you know, in these works, because they are so conditioned by a very reactionary, backward-looking form of dogma. Well, we've encountered it all the time, and they do have a vested interest in hanging on. I talked to an individual who said, well, I don't dare try to even study or believe what you're talking about, because I'm endangering essentially I'm endangering my salvation, which is seen in Christian Orthodox terms. So we know what it's all about. And this whole idea of not being connected with esoteric groups, yeah, now I understand. Well, there are so many, he calls the esoteric groups the most glamored of all the groups. He must have a reason for that, and any trip into a modern esoteric bookstore, occult bookstore, shows the kind of stuff that's being written masquerading as truth. People pick it up without a solid foundation in theosophy, and they are taken in. So only advanced disciples with a full and conscious, constant contact with their particular ashram are able to work in this way and be successful, and perhaps at first not be defeated. So let us achieve that kind of understanding. Occult bodies and esoteric, here it is. Occult bodies and esoteric groups are at this time the most glamored of any of the world groups. The work of any disciple in such groups is bound in the early stages to be destructive. I remember teaching long ago in the, when was it? Was it the early 90s? And some students had come in with some huge prejudices regarding the value of the teaching that they were following. And of course, all I did was simply present the Tibetan as I understood him. And the material itself reduced them to tears. You know, they had a real meltdown, not tears of joy, but tears of loss, you know, and tears of having something that they had relied upon so strongly questioned. Okay. The present occult groups, which came into existence prior to 1919, will eventually all disappear. I guess this would include Theosophy and its early presentations, not the writings of Blavatsky, of course. The members who are true and sound, broad-minded and sane, and rightly oriented and dedicated will find their way into esoteric bodies which are free from dogmatism and doctrines and which are the recipient of hierarchical life, which obviously in some manner has been withdrawn or had to be withdrawn, because the masters will not, although they love and support those who are members, they will not support a teaching fabricated in fairly insane minds that lead the students astray. They do not play the role of Bucyrus, the false teacher. And if they have to be destructive at first, then they are, to clear the grounds. Now, you know, 1919 is an important year here, because we're talking about the year that I think in the sign Scorpio, was it? And in November, the Tibetan made his first contact with Alice Bailey. Now just think, perhaps the first alarming contact was when Master Kuthumi walked into the study where Alice had not gone to church that Sunday morning and presented himself and told her there was some work of value that she might do if she would only be a good little girl. I don't know quite what that means about her character. She had some things to pass through, and with Mars rising on the ascendant in Leo, she was certainly a militant person, and her astral body showed at first more signs of the sixth ray than of the second, but eventually her ray structure became 2112-7. And then some years later, I suppose that had occurred in the 1890s sometime, and maybe 20 years later, here's the Tibetan sounding a note in her ear, to which she had to become alert, and a voice appeared. And she at first was full of consternation, telling him she was no darn psychic or something of that nature. But he just asked her to give what he had to say a fair hearing, and I guess all of us can imagine that if we gave initiation in human and solar or something like that a fair hearing, or letters on occult meditation, we would be immediately impressed by the quality of what was being imparted. Well, I do believe the Tibetan will be one of the externalizing masters, and he will be teaching the ancient methods of esoteric healing. And pretty much with healing, you've got to have an orientation towards the physical plane, which is quite strong. He said that of those who would be in the healing group. So we can expect him at some point, and I guess before Master Kutumi would be presenting himself more around the time of the reappearance of the Great Lord, Maitreya, that the Tibetan would be among us. Well, they are very adaptable, these adepts, as we might expect, and they're always observing what humanity has done, or at least periodically so, and now much more frequently because the enterprise of the externalization is gaining steam. So we have brought ourselves to page 571, almost 572. And, you know, these programs at the moment, until I can gain a little more steam, are pretty well 1 hour programs. So this is 568 then to 571. And, it'll be starting, I better not do that. Okay, the end of program, yeah. Okay, so program 71. And we are beginning here 8th of June, right? That's good. All right, so, and we will continue here about these very interesting and important preparatory steps for the externalization of our elder brothers and sisters, the initiates, and eventually the masters. So this is the end of program 71. And it is 568 to 571. And the day is the 8th of June. I don't know whether I'll be able to continue tonight. I would like to, but there are webinars lying ahead and that sort of thing. So we begin on 571, and, you know, basically, hopefully, we can understand more how we will fit into preparation for the true externalization. We're only 5 years from the time that DK said important decisions would be made regarding the actual externalization and the emergence of the masters. They have a lot to build before we can talk about the Christ reappearing. They have to work within the 5 planetary centers and be recognized for their wisdom, and their initiates and disciples have to be recognized as of value to the governments which are related to those centers. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of building. And it doesn't take place overnight, though these days things occur rapidly. And with the pressure that humanity is under at the present moment, perhaps humanity will be forced to develop rapidly. Somewhere the Tibetan says that humanity will discover regarding the nature of its problems that it alone cannot really solve them. And yet, of course, humanity must take responsibility so that the prophecy by human hands and human feet can come true. You know how the Christ was always so particular about fulfilling the law. Well, there are laws to be fulfilled here by humanity, and under the impress of Sirius, the Great White Lodge, or maybe Blue Lodge on Sirius, and we have to follow the rules. So it's going to be an exciting time, the next number of centuries. As much difficulty and opposition as we may find in the earliest part of the Aquarian age, which is coming in under Saturn, you know, the planet of difficulty, but also the planet of opportunity. Okay, friends, well, I'll see whether I can go on, not immediately, but maybe the hour will not be too late tonight, and I'll be able to carry this forward. So meanwhile, study hard, meditate deeply, serve in the area that you've been called to serve in, and lots of love and success, many blessings. See you soon.